Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the World Book Night event organised by the City Chapter. The City Chapter is a partnership of the 4 libraries in Armagh. They are Armagh City Library, Armagh Robinson Library, the Cardinal O'Feich Library and Archive, and the Irish and Local Studies Library. 2 of the libraries belong to Libraries NI, and 2 of the libraries are independent. And what I think is great is the 4 of us have been working together for 20 years, because this year, the City Chapter, this partnership that we established, is still going strong, where we work together to celebrate particular anniversaries in the literary world. And this is why we wanted to do this for World Book Night, Friday the 23rd of April. And we know that the theme is always the idea of encouraging people that no matter what you're doing on Friday evening, that you would maybe take 1 hour, set yourself a bit of time, and to read something, perhaps on your own, or to read alongside other people. Now, this time we're asking you more to sit back and enjoy while someone else reads to you and talks a little bit more about the work. And we have invited Rose Servatova to be our author for this particular World Book Night. Rose is from County Limerick and would normally have come to visit us, I'm sure. In fact, she was with us in Armagh for Armagh's Georgian Festival in November 2019, when she launched her latest book for the Northern Ireland launch in Armagh. So you can imagine we were very pleased that she chose us, and very fitting as well with the Georgian connection. So we've invited Rose to talk about her recent books. She's award-winning in her writings, and I should let you now just hear more from Rose. So over to you, Rose.
Hello, hello. It is I, Rose Servatova, and it is World Book Night, and I am here and I'm delighted to be talking about books and my books and humour and Jane Austen and etc. So the most important thing, almost as important as books, is having your favourite beverage with you, which I have in a lovely cup here. Tea, I love tea, and hard to talk if you don't have a sip every now and again. So, thank you so much to the City Chapter in Armagh for inviting me along to give a chat. They've had, I would love to say, the pleasure or the penance of my company in the past. They invited me up for the Georgian Festival there, and I launched my second book, the Watsons, at their event, and it was amazing, and I fell in love with Armagh. The people, the buildings, everything, and thank you so much for inviting me back. You obviously can't get enough of Mr. Collins, Mr. Bennett. So I will be talking about 2 particular books, and I will do it in chronological order. It just makes sense for me. And the first one will be the book that is based on the correspondence between Mr. Collins and Mr. Bennett from Pride and Prejudice. Now, as I suppose I came to Jane Austen as in my mid to late teens. Totally fell in love with the books, fell in love with all the heroes, wanted that type of life, imagined them trotting over the hills, coming to collect me on horseback and all that. And it's, still do to an extent. But anyway, love period drama, love all everything to do with historical fiction and that. Now I'm open to other genres, of course, but I suppose that is the area that I loved very much. And naturally loved Mr. Darcy and Mr. Knightley, etc. But as the years went on and as I grew up and became cynical about the world and learnt all about love and hurt and pain and joy and fun and friendships and all sorts, I felt there was still so much depth in Jane Austen's books, and as I read them and reread them over the years, the Mr. Darcy's kind of took a step back, and funnily enough, and maybe more in suiting with my own style of writing, the humorous minor characters kind of stepped forward. So often when I'm watching adaptation or reading a book now, it's often the background, the humorous minor characters. The Mr. Collinses, Mr. Bennets, the the for example, Miss Bates, and Mr. Palmer in Sense and Sensibility, and even, let's say, in the adaptation of Sense and Sensibility that Emma Thompson wrote the screenplay for, what was his name? John Middleton and Mrs. Jennings, they were just so well captured, and that humour and that just, and as I say, Mr. Palmer played by Hugh Laurie, it's just captured something, and it was just wonderful. So there's so much humour in Jane Austen, and that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. It's what influenced my writing. My writing isn't all humour, and that there is what Jane Austen hit on, which was the moral compass, of course, as well, and people learning as time went on. They're on a journey, really, essentially, and what they come to know about themselves and maybe about others in the world, and that. So I do have that too, but today I'm going to speak about a little bit about the humour. So when I was writing the Longbourn Letters, it was really only for myself I was writing initially. I was walking the roads, looking over ditches, and I kept thinking about Mr. Collins and Mr. Bennet. Now initially it was Mr. Collins, and unfortunately it was a diary, which, thanks be to God, never made it into the world at all, because can you imagine Mr. Collins's diary? Now Mr. Collins is arrogant and one-sided and blind to certain things and up in his high horse and judgmental and that. So you can imagine that's all it would be about. But I was thinking about it when I tried to write, and Mr. Collins did write. There was about 5 correspondence between Mr. Collins and Mr. Bennet in the book Pride and Prejudice. So I decided, well, you need his opposite to show him in his true glory, and vice versa. Mr. Bennet, we'll get to see him so brilliantly through his wit and that in these correspondence. So what I'll do is I'll fill in these letters, and I'll continue on beyond the end of Pride and Prejudice and see where we go. And that was a totally relaxed write. I just scribbled down my notes and kept at it, and laughed an awful lot while I was writing, to be honest. It was great crack. It was a very fun write. So that was that, and to help me I had 2 pictures used from the 1995 adaptation. I'm hoping you can see that's my original Mr. Bennet, which was taped onto the back of a kind of a cardboard box or something like that. So I printed off a picture, and I'd say there's tea spills there, more than likely. So Mr. Bennet was witty and cynical, and I just wanted a picture that captured him kind of in his library, looking at the world, kind of shutting the door on the world a bit as well, and having his glass of port. That was kind of the picture I took. The one I have for Mr. Collins I lost myself in a pub many years ago, and I never bothered printing it out again. But if you close your eyes and think of 1995's version of Mr. Collins with David Bamber playing the leading role, it will not take long for the image to arise before you of the character that I portrayed in my book, The Longbourn Letters. Now, so what I'm going to do is just read from a part of Pride and Prejudice we're probably all familiar with, which is Mr. Collins coming to Longbourn. We know he's come to Longbourn, we know he's proposed and he's been refused, but he's now gained admittance to the heart of Charlotte Lucas and into Lucas Lodge. So we're now still at the very early stage, so he's still kind of swanning over to Lucas Lodge. This is, let me just check here now. His wedding day is approaching, and he has returned in order to marry Charlotte Lucas. So he's actually staying at Lucas Lodge, and we'll just read the 2 letters that kind of indicate at the very beginning still the relationship between the two. And I must have a cup of tea. I must have a sup of my tea. One sec now. So this is Mr. Collins writing to Mr. Bennet. Dear Sir, and he's now at Lucas Lodge. Dear Sir, I fear I have not received any acknowledgement, as would be customary, that you have read my note announcing my safe arrival at Lucas Lodge. I am sending this urgent message with the boy today, and a stern warning that he should not leave until he has secured a reply, for I know that you would be most anxious to hear that I hear from you on the eve of my wedding day. With respectful compliments to your lady and daughters, William Collins. So naturally Mr. Collins has arrived at Lucas Lodge and has sent word immediately that he has arrived safely to Lucas Lodge on the eve of his wedding. He sent this message to Mr. Bennet, and he's expecting a response. because this is who he is. He's full of pomp and ceremony and etiquette and all sorts. Sure, Mr. Bennet couldn't care less, but I'm sure, I mean, he knows what's his duty, but he's not really that pushed. So this is Mr. Bennet's response. Same day. Dear Sir, let me apologise at once for not formally welcoming you into Hertfordshire. As you have been in the county on several occasions already, I was quite unaware that it was necessary. How unfortunate that you fell through the carriage door, but likewise you were most fortunate that Baroness Herbert was not passing at speed at the time. She would have trampled on you for certain and not looked back. A rumour exists that she once drove her carriage through the lake at Netherfield when it was low, in order to follow the hunting dogs as they chased a fox. I assure you, we look forward with excitement to your wedding celebration on the morrow. Our Jane, as you know, is in town with her uncle and aunt Gardiner, but the rest of our family shall be present to witness this auspicious occasion. Regarding psalm reading, I am delighted that you do not find your cousins are entirely heathen in their ways. Rest assured that we do keep a hoard of religious literature in our library as fodder for the spiritual wants of my girls. Mary, in particular, relishes the stuff, and I dare say you did not find a copy of Fordyce's sermons, as Kitty and Lydia enjoy it at bedtime as bedtime reading, particularly in the summer when the light permits. It helps to clear their heads of soldiers. But, sir, you have greater things on your mind. Yours sincerely, Henry Bennet. So that's the kind of banter over and back. So obviously Mr. Bennet is referring to some of the stuff that appeared in Mr. Collins's previous letter, which he had ignored responding to. So there was kind of like that in the initial establishment of their relationship, I suppose. The relief of Mr. Bennet that Elizabeth didn't marry him, so that he doesn't have him as a son-in-law, but at the same time trying to keep on good terms but keep him at arm's length. And because Mr. Collins doesn't spot a lot of the clues and the cues, Mr. Bennet ends up having quite a lot of fun with it. So, another sip of tea, because I don't like tea going cold. He's still reluctant, as we see later in the year. He's teasing Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is totally distraught that Elizabeth did not pay heed to his letter, or Mr. Bennet did not pay heed to his letter telling Elizabeth to stay away from Darcy because Lady Catherine de Bourgh does not approve. In fact, quite the opposite happens. Elizabeth and Darcy end up together, and Mr. Bennet sends off a letter asking Mr. Collins to congratulate him because not only is Jane going to marry Bingley, but now Elizabeth is going to marry Darcy. So in effect, everyone has ignored Mr. Collins's advice, etc. But Mr. Bennet cannot help finding the humour in the whole thing, and thinks that, well, as you're a cousin of Elizabeth and Darcy is the nephew of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, you're practically related now to Lady Catherine. So he gets quite, even though Mr. Collins is still uptight about the whole thing, Mr. Bennet is poking fun. So, my dear sir, a letter from Mr. Bennet to Mr. Collins. I congratulate you, for you must be delighted. Elizabeth's impending marriage to Darcy makes you practically a nephew-in-law of Lady Catherine in all but name. Little did you think, when you were casting yourself at her feet as a humble servant, that you would one day look her in the eye as an equal and relative. I hope in time, when her fury takes a turn for the better, that she will relish, nay, enjoy the connection as much as we do. Fear not, your wonderful passages will get a day out at some future time. Mr. Collins had written some passages for the marriage of Darcy to Miss de Bourgh, but obviously they won't be needed now. Keep them safe, sir, for you never know when your eloquent passages will be in great demand amongst the upper gentry of this fair land. May I caution you, sir, not to trouble yourself with rushing to our sides on this visit. So Mr. Collins is after making a bit of a run for the hills after Lady Catherine was so angry. And here is Mr. Bennet telling him, well, don't rush to our sides anyway. We know that you will be tending to the needs of your wife during this delicate time of expectancy, and we would not have it on our consciences if she would need you at Lucas Lodge while you're entertaining us. Yours is a generous spirit, and one we must take care not to take advantage of. If we see you within the week, we will consider ourselves most fortunate. Another reason which would have me delayed the pleasure of your company, is that you would not find us quite ourselves, as wedding preparations have taken over our lives, minds, and purses. The wedding will be joined. Elizabeth and Darcy, Jane and Bingley. The date will soon be fixed, and if you hold tight at Lucas Lodge, you most probably will be in attendance, for these lovers have no patience. So I'll leave the letter at that. But, so the fun is there, the poking, the potential to have great crack and great sport. And he actually acknowledges that he would not, and this is in Pride and Prejudice, he would not give up Mr. Collins's correspondence for anything. He loves, he gets great entertainment value from them. So that's really good. And of course Mr. Collins loves having a male relative in his life. He loves respectability and just his sphere of influence, which Mr. Bennet teases him about, that he's quite something to be reckoned with. So, but there's a change over time as the relationships becomes important, and there's a little rift which they end up sorting out over time. And I did include a letter which Mr. Bennet kind of writes. I included 2 letters which he kind of writes under the influence of alcohol, and I just had great fun with them, and thinking of him there, having his few glasses of port maybe, and writing his letter to Mr. Collins, and not being able to help himself having an extra little bit of fun, or talking nonsense, going off on a tangent. And also, I was thinking about Jane Austen, would she approve? And I think she would very much. If we remember, Mr. Elton proposes to Emma when he's had a few too many tipples, and as we know in life, it actually often has led to very funny and very comical situations, because someone might have had a few for courage or whatnot. So Mr. Collins and Mr. Bennet certainly writing under the influence. This is a shorter of the 2 letters, and I won't read it in full. I'll read most of it. My dear Sir, having just this evening reread your most recent letter, I decided to drink several glasses of cognac in an attempt at commiserating with you in your current plight, displaying solidarity for my own flesh and blood, and finally, because your letter put me in mind of the French and a bottle of cognac, which I had almost forgotten I had. I confess up front, I find myself very merry at present, but I shall proceed with this letter regardless, for I am feeling particularly philosophical this starry night, and full of steely determination, and not to be swayed. What a most unfortunate thing, to bring the wrath of her ladyship upon you yet again. Of course I've never seen her in such a humour. She's all sweetness and charm whenever we meet, but my imaginative capabilities are very great, and I have no doubt that she is fierce when riled. Indeed, Admiral Nelson could do with such a few of her ladyships on board when dealing with the French, and victory would be certain. But not before a few trunks of their best cognac is secured to the mast, I say. Did you know that many shipments of cognac are distributed around Europe from the port of La Rochelle in France, where the Romans set up house and home many years ago and began salt production along the coast? There are few advances in man's development and industries, I find, that the Romans had not thought of first. There are many who do not want to hear this, especially the men of science and invention and the money-grabbing mill owners and city merchants, but I dare say we will discover in time that the Romans had invented everything many thousands of years before they dawned on us. Which puts me in mind that I was often told I am the proprietor of a Roman nose. They tend to be large, with a distinct bump at the top, causing them to curve somewhat, similar to a bird who lives along the coast called a puffin. There is a young French soldier, of whom we read about in the newspapers as rising swiftly up the ranks in his military career, by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte, whom they claim has such a nose. But the Greek nose, now that is very nondescript feature, which adds no distinction whatsoever to the face. It may as well not be there at all. But your own nose, Mr. Collins, being bulbous, adds plenty of character to your face, and suits you perfectly. For if a person takes one look at your face, cousin, they have your character in an instant. Mr. Bennet up to no good, pulling and poking fun at his cousin yet again. And as time goes on, you know, their families develop. Mr. Bennet becomes a grandfather because Jane maybe and Elizabeth or whoever has children. There's extended others marry, others move to the neighbourhood. He lets him know about the neighbours. There's some very comical neighbours in there I haven't mentioned today, but there's some really, really funny ones, and obscure and eccentric, and that's of course what Mr. Bennet loves. Whereas Mr. Collins wants respectability, and he wants, you know, neighbours he can be really flapping about really with, who are well-to-do or well-connected, whereas Mr. Bennet gets great fun out of some of his very, very strange and eccentric neighbours, and tells Mr. Collins, of course, all about them in his letters. And one of them actually turns very wealthy in the end due to part of his eccentricity. And of course, when he becomes probably one of the most influential people in the region, Mr. Collins, as we know, will be all over him like a rash. But anyway, but Mr. Bennet gets great crack out of that. Now, we also know that Mr. Bennet, or we believe, or I believe, that he was quite a trickster in his youth. And again, like that, it was about observing things and maybe poking fun or playing tricks maybe when he was a boy. So that kind of ties true. And actually, when Mr. Collins comes to Longbourn on occasion to do something which he thinks is extremely important and pompous and, you know, connected with his role as a clergyman and uplifting people and putting the fear of God in them and stuff like that, sometimes he might kind of, you know, have a brandy, a cognac or a port for Dutch courage, and sometimes things don't work out. And there were a few tricks that went kind of, or a few things, incidences, let's say, and they come to the fore, and they add humour to the book. And they're also that side of Mr. Collins that is played out in the adaptation. So when we look again at Mr. Collins, let's say, dancing at the Netherfield Ball in the adaptations for screen, we often see him dancing clumsily. You know, he wants to sing and show off that he's, you know, that there's nothing untoward about a clergyman, you know, singing or dancing and all that. So, you know, there's great humour in the adaptations as well when we see Mr. Collins trying to let his hair down, and to everyone else's horror, really, more than anything. So similarly, I kind of brought that true as well. So something happens, great disappointment in Mr. Collins's, very temporary disappointment actually, but because Mr. Bennet kind of probably pours an old drop of something into him to kind of steady the nerves and whatnot, then they end up playing a trick on Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and it kind of backfires a bit. So this is a letter that Mr. Bennet writes because he tries to gain admittance to Lucas Lodge, where Mr. Collins is recuperating. And here we go. Dear Sir, I send you this brief note as I tried to gain admittance to Lucas Lodge earlier to see how you fare, but I was informed that you were still indisposed. I believe Charlotte thinks it's my fault. But was it not a marvellous trick? And I have no doubt that had you not the larger share of a bottle of cognac in you at the time, you would not have seen it through. I admire you, sir, for taking a dare which risked the displeasure of your noble patroness, but you did it, cousin. You pulled it off. Imagine the look on her face when she finds her horses hitched towards her carriage instead of away. And if you were not in fits of laughter before the fall, perhaps we might have had the pleasure of witnessing her reaction from a safe hiding place. But alas, it was not to be. In all solemnity, we were not to know that there was an 8-foot drop on the other side of that hedge. But your head, sir, it will heal, and they're making such a fuss of you at Lucas Lodge. And were we not extremely fortunate that Baroness Herbert was charging past at just the right time to offer us a lift home? Until you come to visit when you are recovered, your secret is safe with me, Henry Bennet. Okay, so that is where I'm going to leave the Longbourn letters, only to say that it's Jane Austen's minor characters that I love probably exploring and teasing out, and likewise I carry this through in the Watsons. So while of course we've got protagonists, my challenge is almost sticking with the protagonists Of course I do, and I see the story through, but I have so much fun with minor characters, and they do come into their own sometimes, and they also help a plot when it gets heavy, when things go wrong. They lighten it, but they also have their stories, and sometimes they can be, upsetting or tragic too. So a lot of people don't know the Watsons. So what I'm going to do is just read a paragraph about what the Watsons is about. It's a novel that was started by Jane Austen when she moved to Bath in about 1804. She started it, but she did abandon it, and she was only 17,000, 18,000 words into it. But yet she had done such an amount of describing the characters we were to meet that there was quite a lot of material to go on. And she also indicated to family what she might have planned had she continued with it. We cannot know for certain, but there's parts of it that definitely are Austen style and seen elsewhere. So I definitely loved this. There are two unfinished novels by Jane Austen. One is Sanditon, which we probably have heard about. It was brought to screen there last year, the year before. And then, of course, there is this one, The Watsons, which is her other unfinished novel. So I'll just read that little bit. I'll drink my semi-cold tea. Oh, getting very cold. But anyway, so yeah, I will read first of all just a little bit the what describes. It's like the blurb for the Watsons, because as I say, the tale is not really known to people, and this might help when I'm reading out excerpts then. Now, mine is a completing of the Watsons, so I virtually untouched Jane Austen's beginning, but there were parts of it that either needed to be kind of chopped or moved a little bit, because it was literally info dumping, so they needed just to become coherent, and so that was the case. But also there was a character, the family name is mentioned in Jane Austen's, but I developed one of the characters, and they're quite an important minor character. They're actually quite a ridiculous character, but I introduced them earlier, so I put that into, let's say, Jane Austen's slot as well. And I really worked hard to ensure that people could not tell where Austen finished and I began. And I've been very, very lucky that people can't, which is a great relief to me, I suppose. The last thing I wanted, because I really wanted it to be smooth and something that looked like Jane Austen had just come back and completed. I really wanted it to look like it was found under the floorboards at Chawton Cottage when they went digging it up. Oh my God, they actually did finish. She did finish the Watsons. I wanted it to seem as if it had been completed. So I didn't kind of go off. Not to say that I wouldn't do it, and I have great time for books that, let's say, have a very different style. But when it's a continuation of Jane Austen, I think you can't really have a quarter of the book in one style and then start, totally different again. So, but what things that tied her style and my style together were actually good. Like, as in, I found it easier. I'd gained confidence from the Longbourn Letters. I found the writing a pleasure. The length of sentences and her style and the amount of dialogue and the lack of descriptions of how people look, of how they dress, of how a house looks. It really, she cuts to the chase. It's about people and their relationships. It's about the social setting and that. So that really suited my style, and her humour, of course, and her love of minor characters. So that all helped me to merge with her, what would you call it, the piece that she'd written, and just continue it on. So here we go. This is the Watsons. Emma Watson returns to her family home after 14 years with her wealthy and indulgent aunt. So as you know, we see things like this happening with Fanny Price and elsewhere, where someone is, and in her own family, her brother Edward was sent to the Knight family, and he was adopted and inherited their fortune. So it is something Jane Austen is very familiar with. So Emma Watson returns to her family home after 14 years with her wealthy and indulgent aunt. Now more refined than her siblings, Emma is shocked by her sister's flagrant and desperate attempts to ensnare a husband. There's a first flag for a bit of humour there. So her sisters are obviously attempting to ensnare husbands. So there you go. To the surprise of the neighbourhood, Emma immediately attracts the attention of eligible suitors. And why it's the surprise is because she actually has no money. So I suppose, which that if she's a woman of consequence, but she has beauty and she is genteel and she is refined. So I suppose those are virtues as the community would see. But they are surprised that she immediately attracts the attention of eligible suitors. Notably, the socially awkward Lord Osborne, heir at Osborne Castle, who could provide her with a home and high status if she is left with neither after her father's death. Now, her father is quite unwell. He's bedridden quite a bit, and he's up and down, he's in and out, and a bit like Mr. Woodhouse, I suppose, in Emma. I won't say he's a touch of a hypochondriac, but Jane Austen finds opportunities for humour amongst those who are sick or imagine themselves to be sick. So we know the Mary Musgrove, Mr. Woodhouse, and everything about Sanditon is about hypochondria. So Jane Austen pokes fun at it. So we do find, that the potential of her father's death and where it would leave her and her sisters is obviously high on their mind. Soon Emma finds herself navigating a world of unfamiliar social mores, making missteps that could affect the rest of her life. How can she make amends for the wrongs she is seen to have committed without betraying her own sense of what is right? How can she do what is right in the eyes of other people without doing a greater wrong in her own eyes? So that's kind of where we're at. That's poor old Emma. She's in a dilemma. So there, and that rhymes. Here we go. So let me just see here now. And I suppose why I was again myself in a bit of a reckless mood when I decided to take on the Watsons, because at times, of course, I felt, who do I think I am? And it has been a reaction I received, as in, how did you dare take on Austen? Like, it's almost like it's one thing to kind of, put a time machine in it and do a totally different spin, but to actually imitate her and proceed and finish it to her standard or to a satisfactory conclusion for real, for Jane Austen fans, so that they won't think this is pure crap. But I have to say, I was feeling a little bit reckless and I was feeling courageous after the Longbourn letters. But as I say, the most important thing was probably having a bit of fun. Now, it was hard work, especially after the first or second draft was written. Like all the other drafts, toil and trouble and struggle. Sometimes because I suppose I was working full-time too, and there was various other things that were playing a part at the time. But ultimately, the love of the characters, the love of the people, the love of everything that Jane Austen had put down on paper, it was just a pure joy. And again, the fun is often felt when you read something. You can tell when a writer is writing something very light, that it wasn't dragged out of them, that they actually enjoyed it. And there's parts of this book I really enjoyed, and some of the characters that I really loved, I had great fun with. So that was it. So now the first bit is that hypochondriac father. So as it turns out, they have a visitor. People talk about Mr. Watson. He's well one minute, well enough to do something, next thing he's inside in bed. And of course talk goes around Mr. Watson isn't well. He hasn't been well for a long time. He's dealing with various different things, and he had to give up his clerical duties, and that's a greater burden on him now, because he had to give it to, not like, he has sons, 2 sons, one married well and works in the city, but the other son decided to go into become a surgeon, and he's doing his apprenticeship. So as neither son became a clergyman, he cannot leave the living to them, and therefore the daughters are kind of unprotected. They really do have to marry well, because both the home and the living that came with the parish is gone effectively to someone else once he dies. And already the work, his duties have been handed over, because he wasn't well enough to keep doing them. So the girls are on their way to the ball, but a friend of the family, she's Mr. Watson's cousin's wife, Now her husband is dead, she's a widow. But she comes because she kept putting it off for years, and because she heard that Mr. Watson wasn't well, and she decided to pay a visit at last. Her son, she has one son, he's gone to sea. He's gone to sea, and basically she has time now to call on her old friend Mr. Watson. They're reminiscing on olden times, and she volunteers to read to him, keep him company while he's bedridden and that. So the girls once returned to a happier disposition. Emma looked in upon her father and found Mrs. Ellingham quite at home in a low chair, wearing spectacles and reading aloud from a book. "And now, Mr. Watson, I will retire for a while to return to you later and finish this chapter." "Thank you, Mrs. Ellingham," he replied. "You have been very kind." Placing a wick in the book to mark her page, Mrs. Ellingham smiled at Emma before leaving the room and gently closing the door after her. When he was sure that he had heard her footsteps descending the stairs, Mr. Watson began. "Really, Emma, I do not know how you expect me to tolerate this woman. Is there any way to banish her from our house?" "Father, it's only her second day. We believed you enjoyed her company. Has she been unkind?" "Not unkind, if reading those dreadful novels is not considered unkind. I dislike them intensely. I had rather be forever alone than in the company of a very bad book." Emma, relieved, laughed. "You must tell her, father, and do so thoughtfully. I did attempt to encourage her to read something from my own library, but she found them dull and kept nodding off. So I have spent the last several hours in agony, hours that I do not have to spare at this time of my life. This would greatly injure her feelings." Well, this is Emma talking now. "This would greatly injure her feelings. She has given her time to come here and cheer you," said Emma, while moving around the room, pushing back chairs and taking books from his bedside and placing them back on the bookshelf. "And what of my time? Recall, my dear, what Shakespeare said, 'I wasted time, and now doth time waste me.' But yes, she is a kind and attentive old friend, and that being so, I had better find another way. I've been thinking, if I feel a little stronger tomorrow, I will come downstairs. In company I should be safe. She will have no need to read to me. Yes, that's what I'll do. I will listen to this hogwash this evening while you are all at the ball, and tomorrow afternoon, when you have returned, I will declare myself well enough to join you for dinner." "Father, such a scheme!" "Illness is a dangerous indulgence at my time of life. My poor cousin, I no longer wonder at his moving on to his heavenly home at such a young age. The miracle is that he did not depart sooner." So, funnily enough there, I did plant, for those who really know Austen, a couple of sentences, either from her letters that are humorous or from elsewhere. But that, for example, is from one of her letters. "Illness is a dangerous indulgence at my time of life." So that was something that Jane Austen wrote. I believe it was to one of her nieces. And I just felt it was appropriate there, so I put it in there. And it's nice to find those kind of references, because her letters were extremely witty, and I suppose a pity so many of them were destroyed. Thousands of them were destroyed, because I think her family didn't want us to see that side of her, because she was very cutthroat in her observations of people, and some of her best comments are actually in her letters, and obviously the novels are much cleaner in that respect. Now, let's just see what I have there. Oh yeah. Now, so I'm just going to show the wit, I suppose, of Jane Austen as well, the tete-a-tete. And my inspiration for this as well, I liked to kind of merge modern day characters or people we have met since Austen who remind us of maybe characters from Austen. And when I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of old movies, black and white movies and that, and the classic movies, and film noir and all sorts. But I remember the Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movies as being like ones where there was something about them. There was that equality. There was, in that time, in those old movies, the damsel was often in distress, and it was guys and dolls and all that sort of thing. But there was something about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. It was witty and fast, and they were equals, and there was some kind of mutual respect and bond there that I did emulate with some of the characters here. So we have Elizabeth Watson. Elizabeth is Emma's older sister, who is terrified of being left on the shelf now because she was spending so many years looking after all of them after their mum died and looking after her father, who was unwell, and that she's feeling like time is running out now to be catching someone, and I don't have wealth either, so I'm going to have to kind of get out there. She kind of heard that this one of her other sisters marries into another family, and the nephew of that family arrives with others, and she hears, oh great, this eligible gentleman, wealthy gentleman, and on her first meeting with him, he insults her, and he is the enemy number one then after that. So there's quite a lot of, driving each other a bit cracked going on, but because they're thrown together quite a bit, they do meet. So I'm going to read this, and it'll be my last reading, and it's about Mr. Shaw, and he is visiting with his family to the Watsons' house, their parsonage, and he stood up, and it's in the evening. He stood up and moved over to where Elizabeth was tidying away the tea items. See, I can't even say it now. Tea items. Pouring and handing him the last remaining cup, Elizabeth said, "Tea, Mr. Shaw. There is nothing like tea for comforting the soul and making social creatures of us all. There is nothing like tea for loosening the tongue." A complaint, I sincerely believe, Miss Elizabeth, which has never afflicted you in your entire life. It greatly depends on the topic, sir. You, for example, speak much of marriage for one who makes every effort to avoid it. Yes, it's much like sickness, rain, and nuisance women in that regard. The more one tries to avoid them, the more one seems to attract. I must learn to speak less on the subject, and perhaps then I shall have some peace. Oh no, sir, please do no such thing, for then you might speak on more endearing subjects and appear in a better light. It would greatly upset me to find you all ease and pleasantries, for I have put great effort into forming my current opinion of you, and it would upend all my work thus far. We would be a very dull party if each of us was full of niceties. You had best stay as you are. My word, Miss Watson, but you do enjoy giving me a taste of my own treatment of others. I shall endeavour not to disappoint you, and will begin at once. This is the most dreadful tea I have ever tasted. It is too cold, too strong, and too sweet. As was my intention, sir. Now, if you will excuse me. With that, Elizabeth handed Nanny, who had just entered the room, the tea things, and moved back over to her sisters by the fire, with Mr. Shaw following her movements all the while. Up to this point in his life he had never met his equal for wit, openness, and sarcastic social commentary, and had ever looked down upon his company wherever he went, as being far inferior to himself in its ability to observe and entertain. But here was the beautiful Elizabeth Watson, fearless in her approach and dumbfounding in her astuteness, and though he had not admitted it to himself as yet, he was thoroughly captivated. And there, my dear friends, is how Jane Austen influenced my writing so far. I'm actually writing a completion of Sanditon at the moment, which scares the hell out of me a little bit, but if I keep to my principles and keep to the humour. To be honest, the humour in Sanditon is, if anyone has read it, it is so slapstick. I was so shocked when I read it. It was like the Keystone Cops or something. Jane Austen went back to the style of her juvenilia almost. It's borderline, some of the characters are borderline ridiculous. They're OTT, and it's brilliant. So I'm looking forward to finishing that and hopefully getting it out there. And that's it. So I love Austen. I love books. I hope you love books. I hope you love tea. And I hope you have a lovely World Book Night. And I hope I get back to Armagh again soon when it's safe to do so. And thank you again, everybody. I had a great time talking about all this stuff. Thank you so much. And you can find me on my website if you want to follow me, or subscribe to my monthly newsletter. Mr. Collins and Lady Catherine de Bourgh have already put out a bit, and Mr. Palmer and Miss Bingley, and there's going to be other guests writing in the monthly pamphlet. So it's roseservatova.com. Okay, thank you again, everyone, and bye now. Get a book, read a book. Bye.
Well, I do hope that you enjoyed this session to mark and celebrate World Book Night with us in the City Chapter. To Rose, I say thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed taking part and supporting us in this way. And to all the audience, thank you very much for being with us. Obviously, we are a charity. We do not always get grants. We often get donations instead. So if you've enjoyed this and if you'd like to help the City Chapter with further events, perhaps you would be willing to support us through our Just Giving account. But apart from all of that, thank you very much for being with us to celebrate World Book Night 2021.